It begins long before fire and blood consumed Westeros, back when loyalty meant everything, and yet meant nothing at all. Storm clouds hung low over the Dreadfort's distant horizon when news first came to Winterfell. Lyanna Stark had been taken. The Raven's message was short, but every syllable drove steel into Eddard Stark's chest. The Wolf Girl has been stolen by the Dragon Prince. Rhaegar has her. War is coming. And in that moment, in that heartbeat of grief and fury, Robert Baratheon called for fire and vengeance. But Ned hesitated. He stood in the snow-covered Godswood that night, beneath the watchful eyes of the old gods as silence hung heavy. His breath steamed in the cold. Lyanna's laughter echoed faintly in his memory, chasing snowflakes barefoot, wild and free. Robert's voice had come loud and demanding through the hall earlier. "We march on Dragonstone. I will have her back, and I will kill the prince myself." But something in Robert's eyes unsettled Ned. Not love, not pain. Possession. As if Lyanna were a crown he'd been robbed of, not a woman he was meant to cherish. Ned clenched his fists, torn. Robert had been his brother in arms since they were children at the Eyrie. He had fought beside him, laughed with him, bled with him. But now something inside Ned shifted. The honor that had always guided him flickered in the face of Robert's fury. There was no justice in burning the realm for a woman's heart, especially not when that woman may have gone willingly. When Jon Arryn raised the banners, when Robert called for war, when House Baratheon and House Stark were meant to rise in righteous rebellion, Ned refused. He didn't say it with anger. He didn't shout. He simply looked at Robert across the war table and said, "I will not draw sword against the crown without proof. Not for vengeance, not for you." Robert stood there, wide-eyed, blood rising in his face. "Not for me," he growled. "She's your sister, Ned, your sister. The dragon took her, and you want to burn a kingdom to get her back. What if she went of her own will?" The word split the air like an axe through bone. It was the first and last time they ever saw each other as brothers. By dawn, ravens flew. Robert Baratheon declared Ned Stark a traitor to the realm, a coward unworthy of his blood, and a northern fool too honorable to act. Storm's End would ride without Winterfell, and from there history fractured. House Tully was split in two. Catelyn begged Ned to reconsider. Her father, Hoster, favored Robert, but Lisa feared for her safety. Peter Baelish whispered poison in her ear about dragons and death and opportunity. And House Arryn? Jon Arryn had hoped to unite Robert and Ned once more, but the letters had stopped coming. Robert had hardened. He was not the man who once laughed at feasts. Meanwhile, King Aerys, madder than ever, received news that the wolf refused to howl with the storm. He smiled. For once his enemies were divided, and where once he would have burned the north first, now he focused his flames on Robert. Dragons would roast the stag first. The wolf could wait. Robert's rebellion, now Robert's war, was a storm without snow. And it broke hard and fast against the field at Summerhall. The first battles were swift. House Baratheon stormed through the Reach, dragging allies behind them. But it wasn't enough. Without the North, Robert lacked men. Lacking Ned meant lacking the honor-bound lords of the Vale and Riverlands too. And the storm grew dark. Ned Stark sent no men. But he sent ravens. And in secret he rode south alone, cloaked and hooded, to see for himself what the Crown and Robert were both hiding. What he found changed everything. It was Ashara Dane who found him, bloodied on the Dornish border, whispering Lyanna's name in his sleep. She brought him to the Tower of Joy, and there Lyanna waited, not weeping, not broken. She looked at Ned like a sister would, but not one in chains. "I chose this," she told him. "Rhaegar said the world would burn if we didn't build a better one. I believe him, and I'm carrying his child." Ned staggered as if stabbed. "You left us," he whispered. "I left a cage. Robert never loved me, Ned. He loved the idea of me. I didn't want to be queen of his rage." Ned said nothing for a long time. The wind howled outside. Lyanna's face was pale but not afraid. "I was going to fight Robert to protect you," he finally said. "I don't want you to fight for me," she replied. "I want you to protect the truth. This child is hope, Ned. Promise me you'll protect him." Those words broke him, and while dragons marched and stags died, the wolf disappeared. Robert was losing. The rebellion was crumbling. Stannis held Storm's End barely, and Renly was still a boy. Jon Arryn was cornered in the Vale. Without Ned's backing, the rebellion was not a wildfire. It was a candle in the wind. And when the Mad King heard that Robert had taken the field near King's Landing, he laughed. He summoned wildfire. He ordered the gates shut. He commanded the pyromancers to prepare for one final blaze. He would become death, he declared, and take the realm with him. But that's not what happened, because Jaime Lannister, White Cloak and all, heard the order and killed the king, not out of mercy, but because Tywin Lannister had arrived at the gates of King's Landing with 20,000 men, wearing loyalty on his lips and betrayal in his heart. And Jaime knew the Mad King would rather burn the city than let it fall to lions. So he put a sword through his back. One clean thrust, one bloody end. Robert never took the throne. Tywin did, through fire, gold and Lannister steel. The lion, not the stag, claimed the ashes of House Targaryen. And Eddard Stark. He vanished. Not a word, not a raven, only whispers. Some said he took Lyanna north. Others said he died in Dawn. But those who saw him last remembered only the look in his eyes. A man torn between loyalty and truth, between the kingdom and a single child born of love and rebellion. That child would live. That child would be raised not as Snow nor as Targaryen, but as something else entirely. And while the realm crowned a Lannister puppet king, and Robert drowned himself in wine and women, a truth slept beneath the snows of the north, waiting, because the game had changed. And this time, the wolf did not bend the knee, it bared its teeth. Bend the knee, it bared its teeth. The cold never bothered him anymore. Years had passed since Eddard Stark walked out of the red sands of Dawn, carrying a child whose name he dared not speak aloud. He told no one what truly happened in that tower, not even Catelyn. He returned to Winterfell a changed man, colder than the frost that painted the walls, and in his arms he carried a boy with silver flecks in his eyes and the quiet soul of a storm. He called him Jon. Catelyn never asked why the boy didn't look like Ned. She had her suspicions, of course, any woman would. But Ned gave her one thing, silence. Unshakable, solid silence, the kind that buried secrets so deep even the godswood couldn't hear them whisper. Jon Snow was raised not just as a bastard, but as a shadow, not only of Ned's supposed dishonor, but of a war that never truly ended. While Robert drank himself to sleep each night in Storm's End, surrounded by faded banners and emptier dreams, the Lannisters tightened their grip on the capital. Tywin had crowned his own puppet, Tommen's older cousin Martin Lannister, made legitimate by forged paper and bloody daggers in dark rooms. Cersei sat beside him, not yet queen, but with eyes already fixed on the Iron Throne like a lioness on a wounded calf. But the realm hadn't forgotten Robert, and it certainly hadn't forgotten Rhaegar. The people had no love for lions, only fear. The stag, broken as it was, still meant rebellion, and the dragon, though dead, still whispered of prophecy, of kings and songs and fire yet to come. In the north, Ned trained his sons with the blade, but trained Jon with silence. A sword is loud, he'd say, but truth? Truth is quiet, and it cuts deeper. Jon never understood why his father always stared into the fire at night alone, or why ravens from the south filled him with dread. He only knew that he was different. Not just in name, but in soul. Even Arya felt it. She clung to him more than the others. Maybe she sensed he didn't belong, just like she never quite fit either. Bran climbed the towers as if the sky were his birthright. Robb bore the weight of being the Stark heir with honor and pride. But Jon listened, watched, waited, like something inside him wasn't asleep, just hiding. Far to the south, Robert Baratheon wasn't hiding. He was rotting. His rebellion had failed, his love was gone, and the realm he'd tried to save had turned its back on him. He was a broken hammer swinging only at ghosts, yet he was still dangerous, especially to Ned, because even in his drink Robert remembered one thing. Ned Stark did not stand with him, and now rumors were reaching his ears. Whispers of a boy in the north, with Stark blood and eyes like winter storms. A boy who fought like a knight but carried no name. A boy Ned called son, but never looked at like his others. Robert had men still loyal to him. Enough to send one south. One trusted, one deadly. Sir Harland Oakheart, once a knight of the Kingsguard, now a sword for honor. He rode for Winterfell with a single task: find the boy and find out who he really is. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister was building a legacy. The throne was weak under Martin's weight. The lords did not fear him. So Tywin ruled from behind the curtain, placing Cersei in positions of influence, training Jaime to be more than a sword. But even Tywin could not stop what was rising across the narrow sea. Viserys and Daenerys had fled as children, but fire does not die easily. Viserys dreamed of reclaiming his birthright. He was no Rhaegar, but he believed he was something greater. He whispered to sellswords in Lys, bribed magisters in Pentos, and finally caught the ear of Khal Drogo. All the while, Daenerys watched with eyes like dusk, quiet, waiting. Back in Winterfell, Jon Snow crossed into manhood. He was 14 when the truth nearly unraveled. It began in the crypts. He'd gone down to light a candle for Lyanna. Catelyn had forbidden it, but Jon was drawn there like a moth to something he didn't understand. He stared at her statue. He didn't know why it made his chest ache. Just that it did. Then he heard it, a voice behind him. "She died for love," said Maester Luwin, stepping into the torchlight. "Or so they say." Jon turned. "What love?" "Some say it was Rhaegar Targaryen. Others say she was stolen. But no one ever says why Lord Stark won't speak of it." Jon frowned. "Why would he?" Luwin hesitated. "Because some truths are heavier than silence." It was the first time Jon considered that maybe his father's silence wasn't just about shame. Maybe it was about protection. That same night, Sir Harland Oakheart arrived at Winterfell's gates. He came as a guest bearing Robert's sigil, but Ned saw through it immediately. He offered the knight the finest guest quarters and ordered Jon to stay away. But Oakheart watched, listened. He saw how the boy trained. He noted the curve of his jaw, the way his eyes seemed too knowing for his age. He wrote letters, many letters, and each raven flew south like a blade aimed at the truth. Catelyn confronted Ned that night. "You should have let him go to the wall," she said. "There's a danger here." "He's my son," Ned replied too quickly. "No, he isn't," she snapped. "Not truly. And if Robert finds out, if the Lannisters find out, I will protect him," Ned said, quieter now. "You said that once before," she said coldly. "And Lyanna died." The words cut deeper than she knew, but they weren't the only ones watching. Far to the north, beyond the wall, something stirred. Benjen Stark had ridden beyond the Frostfangs and hadn't returned. The Night's Watch grew restless. Whispers of white shadows and silent forests began to spread. The old powers were waking. Fire in the east, ice in the north, and in between a kingdom ruled by fear and silence. Sir Oakheart made his move 3 nights later. He waited until Jon was in the yard alone, practicing with Arya. He watched as Jon moved, graceful as shadow, faster than any of his age. Then he stepped forward, slow and calm. "You move like a prince," he said. Jon straightened, confused. "I'm no prince," Oakheart smiled. "You sure about that?" He reached for his blade. Jon moved on instinct. The steel flashed. Arya screamed, and blood hit the snow. It was not Jon's. Sir Oakheart collapsed, gasping. Jon stood over him, blade in hand, panting. Ned arrived moments later, cloak flying behind him. He stared at the body, at the blood, at the sword in Jon's hand, and he knew. The secret was bleeding out into the snow. That night he took Jon into the Godswood. No words, just silence. They knelt beneath the heart tree, and Ned spoke the truth. Lyanna, Rhaegar, the Tower of Joy, the baby in his arms, the war that never needed to happen. The lies he told to keep him safe. Jon sat there silent, pale. "I'm not your son," he said, voice cracking. "You are," Ned said, "in every way that matters." "But your blood is fire and ice," Jon stood. "And what am I supposed to do with that?" Ned's voice was a whisper. "Survive. Until the world is ready." But the world was already changing. The Raven arrived 2 days later from Castle Black. Benjen was missing. Rangers dead. And the shadows beyond the wall were moving south. The snow came early that year. It clung to the branches like ghosts and fell in whispers, as if the old gods themselves were holding their breath. Winter had not yet been declared by the Citadel, but in the north it already lived in the bones of men. Jon didn't sleep that night. He stared at the ceiling of his room, listening to the wind push against the stone. He could still hear Ned's voice in his head, soft but steady. "Your name must remain Snow." But he wasn't just a Snow, he was something else, something dangerous. Every word Ned had spoken in the Godswood clawed at him. Lyanna, his real mother. Rhaegar, the father everyone hated. the man who had supposedly kidnapped and defiled a Stark girl. The man Robert swore to kill, the man whom songs called both noble and cruel, and now Jon bore that blood, that name, that target. The next morning, Jon said nothing. He trained in silence, ate in silence. When Arya tugged at his sleeve, asking why he wouldn't talk, he only shook his head. She didn't push. She knew the shape of pain even if she didn't know its name, but Catelyn Stark wasn't silent. She stormed into Ned's solar the moment the door shut behind him. Her voice cut through the stone halls like ice breaking on a river. "You lied to me. You lied to the realm." Ned didn't flinch. "I protected him." "You protected him by putting him in my house, under my roof?" While Lannister eyes look north and Robert drowns in memories, what happens when they come looking for Rhaegar's son? Ned looked away. "Then they will find the North ready." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. The North was not ready. Not for dragons, not for Lannisters, not for the ancient cold creeping past the wall. Maester Luwin warned of unrest in the south, lords whispering of rebellion against the Lion King, others speaking of restoring Robert. Dorne had grown silent, too silent. The Martells had not forgotten the death of Elia and her children. And they would not forget the Lannister banners flying over King's Landing. The realm was a powder keg. All it needed was a spark. It came from the wall. The raven that arrived from Castle Black was unlike any before it. Its feathers were half frozen, its beak chipped. Attached to its leg was a message scrawled in a shaky hand. "Riders dead, Benjen missing, the Dead Walk." The words made Ned's blood freeze in his veins. The Dead Walk? Another ranger's tale, surely. But this came from Sir Alistair Thorne, a man not known for fantasy or fear. Jon read the letter, standing beside him, his face pale. He didn't speak, but something flickered in his eyes. That night, Jon stood at the top of the battlements, looking out beyond the walls of Winterfell. The world felt smaller, as if the truth of who he was had broken something inside him. He wasn't just a bastard anymore. He wasn't just Jon Snow. He was the last echo of a war the world still bled from. A war built on lies. He heard a voice behind him. "You want to go to the wall, don't you? Rob his brother, or—" "Not quite." Jon nodded slowly. "I do." Rob didn't argue. He didn't plead. He only stepped beside him, arms crossed. "You always said the Night's Watch was for men with no place in the world," Rob said. "I don't have a place anymore," Jon replied. "You do. You're my brother." Jon turned his head, eyes shadowed. "But not by blood." Rob clenched his jaw. "Blood doesn't make a man your brother. Oaths do." That stuck with Jon, more than he expected. That night he went to Ned. "I want to take the Black," he said. "I need to." Ned stared at him for a long time. "Is this because of what I told you?" "It's because of what I saw in the Godswood. What I feel in my bones. I'm not meant to sit behind walls and pretend I belong." Ned nodded slowly. "The wall is not a sanctuary, Jon. It is a graveyard. Are you ready to be forgotten?" Jon looked him in the eyes. "I already am." Ned couldn't stop him. By the next moon, Jon Snow rode north with a company of sworn men. Ghost followed silently. His eyes, red as burning embers, never left Jon's side. Arya wept and gave him a wooden sword she'd carved herself. Rob didn't say goodbye. He couldn't. Catelyn didn't watch him go, and Ned stood alone in the Godswood, staring at the heart tree, wondering how many more children he would lose to the ghosts of his past. But Jon's journey was only beginning. Castle Black was colder than Winterfell in every way. The men were harder, the food worse, the air heavier, and the truth? Unbearable. He met Samwell Tarly, a coward with the heart of a lion, Grennan Pip, Ser Alisa, cruel and cold, but nothing frightened Jon more than the emptiness beyond the wall. Something was wrong out there. He could feel it. In his sleep, in his blood. Then came the first night he heard the screams. A ranger had gone missing 2 days out. When they found him, his face was blue, his eyes white, his throat torn open. They burned the body before dark. That was the first body, then came the second, and the third, and one didn't stay dead. Jon saw it, killed it. Watched it rise again. "No one believes me," he told Maester Aemon, "but I saw it." Aemon turned his head slowly. "They will believe when it is too late." Jon looked at him, searching his face. "What do you know?" "More than I can speak." "And less than you deserve." Jon left his solar trembling. Back in King's Landing, the lions were growing uneasy. Tywin had received word of Oakhart's death. The letter burned in his hand like wildfire. The North had killed one of Robert's men. Martin was too weak to retaliate, and Cersei was too ambitious to ignore it. She whispered poison in the king's ear. "The North defies us. The Starks grow bold. Perhaps they remember what happened the last time wolves rebelled." Tywin nodded, but he didn't move troops. Not yet. Instead, he sent a raven to Littlefinger. "Find me a reason to put the North back on a leash," he wrote. "Even if you must invent one." Peter Baelish smiled at that. He had been waiting for the right moment to stir the pot. And now he had it. He wrote his own letters. One to the Vale, one to Dorne, and one to the remnants of Robert's old supporters. In Storm's End, Robert Baratheon received a letter sealed with a mockingbird's sigil. He read it in silence, then laughed long and bitter. "So the wolf hides a dragon," he muttered. "And the lions circle." He downed the rest of his wine and stood. "Fine, let's wake the bloody realm." And from that night forward, ravens flew again, not for war, not yet, but for something far more dangerous, truth. The fire snapped and hissed inside the Lord Commander's chambers, but Jon barely felt its heat. His hands were red from the cold, wrapped around a tin cup of sour ale, and his thoughts were darker than the storm rolling across the wall. He'd watched a corpse rise. He'd watched a man he trained beside scream as pale hands dragged him away into the woods. And the worst part? No one cared. Castle Black was blind. The lords of Westeros were deaf. The Seven Kingdoms had forgotten the North, forgotten the Watch, and forgotten that death was never really asleep. Jon didn't blame them. He'd been one of them. He used to think the war was where forgotten sons went to rot, where bastards were buried standing up. Now he knew better. This wasn't exile, it was prophecy. He stood outside that night, staring across the endless snows, and whispered a name he'd never spoken aloud. Rhaegar. It felt wrong in his mouth, like stealing a crown or wearing someone else's skin. But the name echoed through the wind all the same. A few nights later, Sam brought him a book. Dusty, leather-bound, older than the watch itself. "Look," Sam said, opening the page with shaking fingers. "There's mention of a prince, born in the last breath of the rebellion, a child of fire and frost." Jon stared at the page. It said nothing clear. Only riddles, but they felt familiar. Sam looked up. "Do you ever wonder why you're here?" Jon didn't answer. He didn't need to, because beyond the wall, something was coming, and the realm would soon remember why they built it. Far to the south, Ned Stark stood at the edge of Winterfell's Godswood, listening to the soft rustle of dead leaves. A raven had arrived that morning, not from Castle Black, but from the Vale. A strange message signed by Peter Baelish. The Lannisters plot, the Baratheons stir. The realm remembers its debts. If the North seeks to remain untouched, it must choose a side before sides choose it. Ned read the words once, then burned the letter. Peter always smiled while setting fires, and he was always careful to make sure someone else got burned. Ned knew better than to trust him, but he also knew better than to ignore him. In the south, lines were being drawn again. Robert had risen, not to war, but to whispers. His name was still heavy, his rebellion still sacred to many lords. And if Robert began to speak again, if he began to tell his version of the past, the Lannisters would respond, and the North would no longer be able to stay silent. Ned summoned his bannermen, quietly, slowly, under the guise of winter preparations. Extra food stores, steel sharpened, ravens sent to the Glovers, the Umbers, the Manderleys. No banners were raised, no swords drawn. But every man who'd lived through Robert's war felt it in the marrow of his bones. Something is coming, and then something did. The first sighting came from Eastwatch. A lone rider, frostbitten, starved, eyes wide with terror. "They're marching," he whispered. Before collapsing, the Maesters called him mad, but Jon Snow knew better. He and 3 other brothers rode out the next morning. They didn't return, but Ghost did, blood-soaked, growling, and not alone. He brought back a hand, still twitching. That was the moment the wall began to believe it wasn't enough. Jon begged the Lord Commander to send word south, to warn the realm, to call the banners, but the old man only shook his head. The South doesn't care about snow until it's in their beds. So Jon wrote his own letter. He didn't sign it Jon Snow, he signed it Aegon. Targaryen, he didn't know why, only that it felt right. He sent the raven to winterfell.ned, received it in silence, and stared at it for a long time. Then he called Maester. "Lewin, summon my bannermen," he said, louder this time. Not for food. Not for winter. For war. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister smiled at the growing noise. Whispers of Baratheon rebellion. Tales of wolves preparing for a fight. Dornish silence that stretched too long. Whispers that a child lived in the north. A child with Stark and Targaryen blood. Little birds are chirping, Varys murmured in her chambers. And what do they sing? She asked, pouring wine. That a storm brews behind the wall and that the bastard of Winterfell. May not be a bastard at all. Cersei didn't flinch. Kill him. It's not so simple. He's taken the black. He's beyond the wall. Then burn the wall. Varys blinked. For that would be unwise. Then find someone who isn't. In Pentos, Viserys Targaryen laughed for the first time in years. He'd heard the rumors. A Targaryen in the north. A boy hidden by wolves. A prince born from Rhaegar's line. It's impossible, he spat. Or, Ser Jorah Mormont said, it's destiny. Daenerys said nothing. She stared into the flames. She felt it. Something had shifted far away. Across oceans and war and prophecy, she felt the blood tugging at her. Her blood. Her family. Her brother's son alive. She whispered a single word to the flames. Jon. Back beyond the wall, Jon stood before the black gate. The sky above him was grey with frost and silence. Sam was beside him. Gren, dolorous. Hirasa, ghost paced like a shadow. They were going. Beyond the wall again. This time to prove it wasn't myth. They would bring back a body. They would show the realm what death looked like and make it believe. As the gate closed behind them, Jon looked once over his shoulder. He thought of Winterfell, of Ned, of Robb and Arya and the faces of a family he no longer belonged to. And then he looked north, into the white, where eyes like sapphire waited, and the dead marched. And the dead marched. The wall faded behind them like a ghost swallowed by snow. Jon rode ahead of the others, ghost padding beside him like a second shadow, ears alert, fur stiff in the biting wind. His black cloak snapped like a banner of warning against the white. Every breath he took felt like glass in his lungs. Sam said nothing. His face was pale, eyes wide. Gren and Ed kept scanning the trees like they expected them to move. They were 3 days out before they found it. The first corpse, frozen into the trunk of a tree, mouth open mid-scream, eyes gone white as milk. Its chest had been torn open and carefully arranged, bones like broken wings, and in its hand a message not written, carved. We are watching. Sam vomited. Gren cursed. Jon said nothing. He only stared. This wasn't just death, it was ritual. They burned the body and kept moving. Back in Castle Black, Maester Aemon sat alone, reading the second letter from Jon. The first had carried fear. This one carried certainty, the dead walk. He didn't send a raven south, he sent two, one to Winterfell, one to the Citadel. The realm may not listen to crows, but it still feared chains and grey robes. In Winterfell, Ned watched the raven land with heavy wings. He opened the scroll, read it twice, then handed it to Maester Luwin without a word. The Maester paled. It's not possible, he said. It's already happening, Ned replied. He walked to the window and looked at the snow beyond the walls. Send ravens to White Harbour, Deepwood Mott, Bear Island. The wall must not fall. And if the South asks why we gather swords? Ned turned slowly. Then we'll tell them what they always feared, that the North remembers. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister held a dagger as she read Jon's name on the report from the North, Aegon Targaryen, 3. Words that shattered her wineglass and stained. Her dress in red. Jaime stepped back as she paced. Her mind was already turning. If this gets out, she said, the people will rally. A Targaryen. A Stark. One child will undo everything father built. Jaime raised a brow. He's taken the black. He's sworn, she glared. And you still think oaths mean something? She summoned Qyburn. Bring me a solution. He smiled the way spiders do. Beyond the wall, the dead did not hide anymore. Jon and the others stumbled into them, just past the frost fangs. A dozen wights, eyes burning blue, skin grey and brittle. They moved like puppets with strings of ice. Jon fought like a storm. Longclaw sang in the cold, its Valyrian steel cutting through flesh that didn't bleed. But even as he killed them, they rose again. It was only when Sam drew dragonglass and stabbed one through the heart that the others paused. That was their first real discovery. Dragonglass worked, but there wasn't nearly enough. They captured one, a single wight, bound in chains, hissing like a caged animal. Its eyes followed Jon. studied him. It didn't speak, but it knew. He could feel it. They turned back toward the wall. The mission was complete. Now they had proof. Now the realm would believe. In Essos, Daenerys stood atop a dune outside Vaes Dothrak, her hand resting on Drogon's neck. Viserys had grown bold lately. He spoke openly now of the Iron Throne, of ships, of blood owed, but Dany didn't care about the throne anymore. She cared about the dream. It had come again last night. A boy, in black eyes like hers. He stood at the edge of a great wall of ice, his sword burning like the sun. He turned to her and said, "It's not the throne that matters. It's the fire behind it." She awoke gasping. Jorah found her the next morning, staring into the flames. "Get the ships ready," she said. "We're not ready to cross." She looked at him. "Calm, sure, he's calling me the Raven." Reached the citadel a week later. Archmeister. Marwyn read the scroll from Castle. Black and frowned. He rose from his bench, walked past rows of whispering men, and entered the restricted section. There, behind dust and silence, he pulled a book from the shelf. He opened to a page covered in symbols. One line stood out. "When the wolf and dragon meet beneath the shadow of death, the long night ends." He didn't wait for the conclave to decide. He packed a bag and left Old Town that night. When Jon returned to Castle Black, he was greeted like a ghost. The White was still bound, still snarling. They built a cage of fire to keep it still. The men of the Watch stared in horror. Proof. Jon sent another raven, this one to every kingdom. No lies, no politics, just truth. "The dead are coming. Winter is not the enemy. Death is." He signed it Aegon Targaryen, and this time they listened. Ravens reached Storm's End. Robert Baratheon read the letter with trembling fingers. He looked up at Stannis. "We failed," he whispered. "Not yet," Stannis said. Robert turned to Renly. "Call the banners. The Lannisters, let them come. I swore to protect this realm, and for once I intend to keep that oath." In King's Landing, the Iron Throne felt colder. Cersei read the letter and smiled. "A perfect lie," she said. Varys stepped forward. "It's not a lie." She tilted her head. "You believe this?" "I believe in survival." She snapped her fingers. "Then prepare the black water. If death is coming, let it drown before it reaches my gates." In Winterfell, Ned gathered his lords in the great hall. They read the letter, then looked at him. "You knew," Lord Manderley said. Ned nodded once. "You kept his name secret." "For his life," Ned said. "Not his crown." "And now?" Ned's voice was steady. "Now we fight, but the war was already beginning. Beyond the wall, a horn blew once, then twice, then a third time." Jon froze. Gren dropped the torch. Sam whispered, "3 blasts." Jon nodded, hand on Longclaw, White Walkers, and from the shadows, the Night King stepped forward, crowned in ice, eyes like a sky without stars. And around him, 1,000 dead, behind them more. The storm had come. Behind them more. The storm had come. Snow swallowed sound. Jon's breath turned to mist, vanishing before his eyes. The Night King stood 30 paces away, unmoving, a figure carved of blue fire and frozen hatred. Around him the dead stood still, their mouths open, their eyes empty. Bones creaked with cold. The wind howled, but no one moved. Jon gripped Longclaw tighter. He could hear his heartbeat. His blood pounded like war drums in his ears. Ghost growled low, teeth bared, fur bristling. Sam stood behind him, torch shaking in his hand. Gren whispered a prayer Jon had never heard before. The Night King lifted his hand. The dead stepped forward. Jon didn't hesitate. He charged. Longclaw sang through the frost, cutting down the first White in a burst of bone and frozen sinew. Sam lit another on fire. Gren was pulled down screaming, then silenced. Jon swung again, once, twice, 3 times, each strike a desperate breath between life and death. Then the Night King moved. He didn't run. He glided, calm, inevitable. Jon turned toward him, steel ready. Their blades met, ice cracked, steel screamed. The Night King struck with power beyond muscle, his sword radiating chill. Jon parried, each blow shaking him to the core. One mistake, one slip, and it would end. Then the Night King raised his sword high, blue flames licking its edge, and Ghost leapt. The direwolf slammed into the Night King's side, jaws snapping. The sword missed. Jon lunged forward and drove Longclaw. Turned to the Night King's chest, silence. The blade sank in, but only barely. The Night King didn't flinch. He grabbed the sword with one hand and threw Jon 10 feet into the snow. The sky above cracked with thunder. The dead screamed. Ghost fell, and the Night King turned away, walking back into the mist, not defeated, not slowed, but watching, waiting. Jon awoke 2 days later, back at Castle Black. Broken ribs. Burns on his arm. Ghost was alive but limping. Sam hadn't left his side. They didn't kill us, Sam said. He could have ended it. But he didn't. Jon closed his eyes. He's waiting, he whispered. He wants something. In the south, Daenerys landed at Dragonstone. The castle felt old, even older than memory. Its stones were black and hot beneath her feet. Drogon roared above, his shadow cutting across the cliffs like a warning. Viserys stood behind her, drunk on fantasy. The Iron Throne awaits, sister. They'll kneel. Dany didn't speak. Her eyes turned north. Jorah handed her a scroll, a raven. From the wall, from Jon, she read every word twice. Viserys snatched it from her. Lies, he spat. Stark lies. There are no dead kings beyond the wall. They fear your return, that's all. But Dany's hands trembled. She turned to her blood riders. We ride north, Viserys shouted behind her. I am the dragon. But she didn't look back. In King's Landing, Qyburn presented Cersei with a device. A box, he said, carved of obsidian. Inside a heart. It still beats. Cersei raised an eyebrow. Whose? We don't know, Qyburn said, but it does not rot. And it fears fire. She stared at it for a long time, then closed the lid and whispered, Bring the mountain. At Winterfell, Ned prepared the north for war. The ravens Jon had sent had spread like fire. Now from the Iron Islands to the Riverlands, lords whispered the same thing. The long night is real. Even those who hated each other began to send scouts, because death didn't care about old grudges. Not anymore. The great northern hall echoed with the sound of steel sharpening. War horns being tested, provisions counted, Arya trained harder, Bran saw further, Sansa. Watched the ravenry, and Ned wrote one final letter to Jon. His son, his blood, he didn't sign it as Lord Stark, he signed it as Father. The moment Jon read it, something in him cracked open. The boy who had lived in silence finally heard something deeper than truth. Love. He stood atop the wall that night, staring into the black, and he knew. He had to ride south, not to beg, not to kneel, but to warn, to unite. They met in the snows of the Neck, Jon and Ned, for the first time as men. No words at first, just a stare, a long breath. Then Jon said softly, You knew what I was, but you raised me anyway. Ned nodded. Because I loved you. Not because I had to. Jon swallowed. There's no crown coming, he said. There doesn't need to be. They embraced and then rode together. At Moat Cailin, the banners gathered. The wolf, the kraken, the flayed man, even Baratheon Black. Robert had come. Fat, broken, bitter, but standing. When he saw Ned, he laughed once. You were right, he said. I was blind. And now? Ned asked. Robert looked north. Now I see the enemy. Jon stood before them all, not as Snow, not even as Aegon, just as himself. He spoke without fear. The dead don't care about your houses. They don't kneel. They don't negotiate. They only devour. He held up the chain. Inside, the White's hand still twitched. This is your future, unless we stand as one. Silence followed. Then Robert stepped forward and bent the knee, not. To Jon, to truth, Daenerys arrived a week later. Her dragons circled the sky like gods. Returning home, Jon met her at the edge of the camp. They stared at each other like mirrors. I saw you. She said, I dreamed of you, he replied, and neither flinched. Ned stepped forward. This is Daenerys Stormborn, he said. Jon raised a brow. My aunt? Dany laughed softly. That would be the least strange part of all this. Together, they planned, together they united, and together they marched. The final battle came not with horns, but silence. The wall fell, not in a blaze, but in frost. A horn sounded once at Castle Black. Then, nothing, only snow, only ash. The dead had come. Jon stood beside. Daenerys. Ned beside Robert, Arya with needle in her hand. Sansa behind the war tents. Bran watching through 1,000 eyes. And from the shadows, the Night King emerged. His eyes met. Jon's, and Jon understood it wasn't about death, it was about legacy, about ending the song. Before it could begin, Jon stepped forward, the others followed. Aegon. Targaryen Daenerys Stormborn. Eddard Stark. The last stand of the living. The swords clashed, the dragons burned, Arya fell, then rose, covered in blood, her blade red. Bran collapsed. His eyes rolled back. The ravens screamed. Daenerys flew Drogon straight into the sky, then dove. Blue fire met red. Ice cracked under Dragonflame, and Jon faced the Night King alone, Longclaw. In his hand, a memory. In his heart, Ned's voice, Lyanna's whisper, promise. Me. He struck. The blade found its mark, and the Night King shattered. A scream erupted. From the dead. Then silence. Then collapse. Just bones, just wind, just life. Days passed. The bodies burned. The survivors buried the rest. Dany stood atop the wall with Jon. I came here for a crown, she said. But I found my family. Jon looked at her. I never wanted a throne. Only peace, she nodded. And what now? Jon didn't answer. He didn't have to. Behind them, Westeros stirred. Not for kings, not for queens, but for the ones who stood when it mattered. Years later, a song was sung across the realm. Not of rebellion, not of conquest, but of a prince who was raised a bastard and became a hero. Of a girl who rode dragons and chose to stay, of a king who never ruled, but saved a kingdom, of a man named Ned Stark, who chose peace over power, and lived long enough to see it work. For power, and lived long enough to see it work.